Skibbity bop da da. What's up? It's the Culture Detective here investigating your favorite movies. Oh my goodness, I'm so sleep deprived. And yesterday I watched Do the Right Thing. Spike Lee joint. Uh, Written and directed by Spike Lee, Do the Right Thing is a bit of a classic movie released in the year 1989, and it is set in the streets of Brooklyn, New York, and it is about the racial tension between the people. And it's really shocking that the messages of this film, even though this film is from 1989, it's still very, very relevant today. Anyways, I watched this film because of my college film introductory course, and a few weeks ago I watched Crazy Rich Asians for the course, which is dumb, but I'm really happy that that the professor has chosen something that's more widely loved and that's more critically acclaimed and has a more classic status, so that I can enjoy watching movies recommended by this film course. So, Do the Right Thing. The plot is essentially in the core. Sal is an Italian who runs a pizzeria in a very black neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York. He has two employers by the name of Pino and Vito. Pino is an asshole, he is racist, and Vito is not much of a racist, but he can still be a bit of an asshole at some point. Also, he's played by John Turturro. And then we have the character of Mookie, played by Spike Lee himself. He is also employed in Sal's Pizzeria as a pizza delivery boy, and he's friends with Buggin' Out, which is a character's name, Buggin' Out. And Buggin' Out is played by the one and only, the absolutely underrated Giancarlo Esposito. And one day, Buggin' Out was visiting Sal's Pizzeria, and he saw that there weren't any photos of black people up on the wall, but instead they're all Italian Americans, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, And so Buggin' Out asks Sal to put up photos of black people on the wall. And Sal was like, no, fuck you. So they argued, and tension rises. But it's actually much more than that. We have Mookie's girlfriend, Tina, played by Rosie Perez. And then we have the cops who circled around the neighborhood like twice in the movie. And then we have the mayor, who is an old black guy who is being hated by another older black woman by the name of Mother Sister, and the mayor wants to impress Mother Sister. And then we have the Koreans who ran a fruit store across the pizzeria, and then there are three black guys sitting across the fruit store, and they were like, oh my goodness, the Koreans, man, they are stealing our business. I mean, why do they get to run their business? This is a black neighborhood, And one of the three guys has a very thick Jamaican accent, and he was complaining about the Koreans, and then the other two guys, Sweet Dick Willie, that's his name, and the other person, they were trying to stop him from being so mean to the Koreans. And then we have Mookie's sister, who was really friendly towards Sal, the guy who ran the pizzeria. And then we have Radio Raheem, who all the time carries a boombox and blasts Public Enemy on the boombox. And everyone in the neighborhood, we have another gang of black people with three black guys and one black woman, and they hated on Radio Raheem. And then there are the Hispanics, they also hated on Radio Raheem. So there's a very complicated network of characters right off the bat. There's just all these characters, and it's also a really, really small neighborhood. The whole movie takes place in one street on one day, and every single character cross paths with each other like 3 times in the movie, sometimes in the background, and you wouldn't even notice it. And first of all, let's talk about the message of the movie, which is the most important part. Oh my god. So, first of all, let's talk about the message of the movie, which is the most important part. It is very relevant still nowadays, which is kind of sad, but I guess it's also kind of inevitable. This will be relevant for like the end of time, for the foreseeable future. You know, this racial tension, it's forever at this point. You know, it will never disappear, even if the society has become better and more advanced and more progressive. But essentially, ultimately, the message of the movie is that fighting racial injustice with hatred is not going to work. It is counterintuitive. And that's not just between the Italian Americans and the blacks, it's also between the blacks and the Koreans, and it's also between the Koreans and the whites and the Hispanics and all of them towards each other, even in between the blacks. In this movie, we see black people arguing against one another as well, and then in the same movie, we see Sal and Pino and Vito not having a good relationship as well. There's just hatred everywhere. There's hatred everywhere. Everybody just kind of dislikes each other in this movie. And all of this hatred accumulates, stacks on top of one another, and it's just really hard to find some genuine love, which is represented by the mayor's want to be liked and to impress uh, mother sister. And the mayor is probably the only character in this entire story where he doesn't hate on anyone, and he sort of represents that person who, wow, in the midst of all this hatred, I just want to find some love. And it just perfectly illustrates that, this movie. A lot of people have different takeaways from this movie. Some people are like, wow, this movie really shows that black people are oppressed by the law enforcement, which is true, and it is definitely shown at the end of this movie. But ultimately, I don't think that is really the main point. But at the same time, some people would see the last scene of this movie and go, well, actually, Sal didn't do anything wrong. He built the pizzeria place himself from the ground up. He put a lot of work and effort into his pizzeria. Suddenly, Radio Raheem ran into the pizzeria, blasting Public Enemy. A fight broke out because he doesn't want his customers disturbed, and it has ultimately led to the very tragic ending of the story. And some people would be like, you know what, Sal did nothing wrong. The Italian Americans did nothing wrong. Well, that is not entirely true at the same time, but I think ultimately the story is about hatred begets hatred. And no matter which side are you on, if you decide to use hatred, then it's not going to end up well for you or the other side. In fact, the real message of this movie is clearly stated at the end of the movie when there are 2 quotes, one from Martin Luther King Jr. and one from Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote basically says, fighting racial injustice with violence it's stupid. It's actually stupid. So, aside from that, there's one character who stays in the same place and acts as the same thing and doesn't change throughout the entire movie, and that is Love Daddy, a radio show host played by Samuel L. Jackson. And usually characters like this are annoying as hell, but for some reason every time Love Daddy starts narrating and talking on the radio in this movie, it just lightens up the mood, and I actually really enjoy that. Samuel L. Jackson is amazing as Love Daddy in this movie. And I also really like the cinematography of this movie. Clearly, this is Spike Lee's passion project. He really put a lot of thought into how this movie should be filmed. First of all, this is supposed to be a really hot movie. Hot as in high temperature hot. You know, it's a blazing day in the middle of a summer, and it's shown really clearly with the very warm yellowish orange colors, people sweating, and just imagery of people playing with water and trying to get ice cream. It just shows that it's a really hot day. And given that the temperature is hot, the conflicts are even hotter. They're heated up. There are all these Dutch angles and wide angles, and they're all really cartoonish and really fun. And there are also a lot of likable characters in this movie. Again, Giancarlo Esposito's character, Bugging Out, he's a real likable person. At the same time, you can't help but think, I mean, sure, he's fighting for, his people, he's fighting against the oppression of the blacks. But he's doing it in the wrong way because he's advocating putting photos of black people on the wall on a pizzeria instead of focusing on more pressing issues. And so, he's directing that energy to the wrong place. And you can really see that. And then we have Mookie, and his character isn't perfect either because, he isn't responsible. He just doesn't work. He's supposed to deliver pizzas, but sometimes he would just stop and chat while holding an entire pizza on his two hands. Everybody's got their flaws, and everybody's also got their ups and downs. And Sal, he's a good guy. Sometimes he comes off racist, sometimes he comes off as an asshole, but at the same time, he comes off as a really tolerant person. Of course, this movie isn't without its flaws. First off, the first half of this movie is really, really slow paced. It's kind of directionless because all of these characters are being introduced and you're like, okay, where is this movie gonna go? How is it gonna go? And I actually kind of like that in a way. Yes, sure, it's not super enjoyable, but I actually kind of like how we see all these characters being introduced and all these imagery that don't seem to serve the overall story all that much, but it all creates the character of the neighborhood, which I think is created really well. Second of all, there's that one scene where Rosie Perez gets naked and Spike Lee basically rubs an ice cube on her, and we have, oh, thank God for elbows, thank God for thighs, thank God for kneecaps, and thank God for the left nipple, and thank God for the right nipple. And that was hilarious. But apparently in that scene, the reason why they didn't show Rosie Perez's face is because she was crying, because she felt uncomfortable. Even though she agreed to do the scene, she didn't want her family to see the scene. So maybe the shooting of this scene would be problematic nowadays. But other than that, it is a freaking great movie, and I legitimately enjoyed it, especially the last act. I think it is fantastic. At the end of the day, this is a great movie. Not only does it show the racial tension between the blacks and the whites, but also the blacks and the Koreans, and also the Hispanics and other people. And it just goes to show that fighting racial injustice with hatred is a bad idea, and it is reinforced really, really well towards this movie. So yeah, the acting is great as well. Giancarlo Esposito has range. I mean, he can go from a hot-headed dude like Bugging Out to someone cold like Gus Fring. So I'm giving Do the Right Thing a 9 out of 10, and I highly recommend everybody who loves filmmaking to watch this. So, have you watched Do the Right Thing? From 1 to 10, how much you rate it? Like if you like it, and subscribe if you want more, and thanks for watching. I will watch more movies for the rest of this month and review fewer albums, actually, because I feel like as a film lover, I need to watch and review more movies. So, I will review Fantastic Mr. Fox by Wes Anderson. Oh man, I've been wanting to watch this film for the longest of time. And one more Hong Kong movie, actually.